this actually builds on Andy's talk from this morning, where he spoke about going from idea to action to value, and also encouraging other parts of the public sector to get on board with sharing useful information, in this case secondary legislation. So it's lovely to see those connections between the talks. So as part of our group, people come up as you're ready. So Victoria Wray from DIA will set the scene, and she'll give background and a bit of an overview to the talk, which is about where creative government goes to die, transforming API guidelines into digital infrastructure. And then once Victoria has done her overview, we'll have Tom from Syncopate, which is a great little Kiwi startup, and he'll dive into the detail. And then that will be followed up by Jim Clendon, also from DIA, who'll do a bit of a wrap-up and talk about his beautiful and absolutely gorgeous shirt, hopefully. And then there'll be a bit of a Q&A, which will also feature Hamish, which is the other co-founder from Syncopate. So I don't want to eat into your time, so Victoria, take it away.
Oh, sorry. Kia ora tātou, everyone, and just acknowledging what Rachel did yesterday in between sessions was if everyone wants to stand up and have a bit of a wriggle, because I know people like movement, so that will really freshen us up for this session. Stretch. Awesome. I know I certainly appreciated that yesterday when she did it. So, kia ora tātou, ko Victoria Wray tōku noa. Welcome to this exciting session where we're going to see how we can unleash value through publishing our government documents, those familiar legislative or standards in my space, as highly referenceable data sets, not locked away in PDFs. So this is exciting, and I'm finding this really exciting because this will save government time. It will bake in authoritativeness, which, as we know, with AI in this world, we want to know that something is true, where something comes from. But in the theme of this conference, it will also unleash innovation and creativity. Talking of creativity, I created this with the help of AI, and it's beautiful. I don't think elephants are that big or people that small, but that's okay. So to try and give some context to our presentation, I've looked to the story which I'm sure most of you know about, which is the 6 blind men who encounter an elephant for the first time. Does anyone not know that story? Oh, there's a few. Okay. So because each of the men encounter a different part of the elephant, one got its legs. Think, what have I got here? I've got a tree trunk. Another, its tusk, a spear. Another, like the tail. This must be a rope. So they all kind of argue because they all say, "No, this is my truth. This is what I see before me. This is what it is." So this really reflects how people's different perspectives, naturally. This is what's in front of me, this is what I see. There's a lot more to that story, but that's the gist. So what do we have today? We have this, again, in the spirit of creativity, this very beautiful image of a large, impressive elephant in a data centre, also helpfully created by AI. This is the digital government elephant we're talking to you about today. And this is something that, harking back to the experience of different parts of the elephant, that I've seen in my lucky position of sitting into many demonstrations with Tom and Jim and Hamish in the audience there. And there's so many different government agencies we've demoed to, and they've come from different perspectives, whether it be policy or a tech or maybe operational. And they all see their problem solved in the work we've been doing with DocRef. They're part of the elephant. Whether that be from web publishing, so the content as data, which, as we know, AI gobbles up. They love a nice structured bit of data. Or you can do a nice rules as code implementation over it. So that's another exciting implementation. But also, so people see the ability to do some analysis around with consultation and large documents, getting the real the themes coming out. Others, like me, love the versioning that is able to be done with the DocRef tool. You can see over time, as Tom will show you, like 25 different editions, I don't think they call them editions, sorry Andy, of the Privacy Act, and you can see that change over time. So while we can't show you all of the elephant, we don't have enough time, I'm really excited to hear what you each come away with from this, and looking forward to your questions at the end. Thank you so much. I'm going to hand over to Tom, who's going to give you the meat and bones of the presentation, and then my colleague Jim will wrap it up in the end, and he kind of use his shirt as a very exciting interactive tool. Thank you so much.
It's staying on.
Thanks, Victoria. Nice. Okay. Thank you so much for having me. And I have to say at the top as well, just following the previous speaker as well, that we're talking about sort of courage and creativity in government. And one thing I have to say up the top is Victoria and Jim, and Andy as well, in some of the previous work that we've done as well. As someone who works outside government, when you do encounter people who are willing to take a risk, willing to, use their courage and try and, how to approach something differently, it makes a really big difference. So I just wanted to kind of call that out before I start as well. Hamish and I have had a lot of experience sort of working inside, outside and alongside government for kind of more than 10 years in my case, and probably longer for Hamish. And one of the things that I've found is from working outside of government, people tend to think about sort of policy and regulation and implementation as being a little bit like this photo on the left. So it's just kind of striding out into this great wilderness. You kind of wake up and you go, it's a beautiful day in Wellington. What are we going to do today? How should we change the world? How should we, depending on, maybe if you're in Auckland, people think you're just trying to make their lives difficult. But I think it can be easy to assume that government is something that is free of constraint, and there's a lot of flexibility in the way that you do things. But in reality, it's more like the image on the right. So there's very few kind of green fields policy areas where you kind of walk into and you just go, right, what are we going to do today? The first step is always understanding what's come before. That's important because there are kind of good constraints and bad constraints, right? So some of these are good constraints because they protect the public interest, they generate sort of consistency and interoperability and standardisation, but some of those constraints are bad constraints, and we're going to cover off sort of both of those as we go through the presentation. A lot of my experience, a lot of Hamish's experience has been frustrations due to bad constraints from working with documents. So documents are the infrastructure for government, for the rule of law, for all of the good things that we like in society in lots of ways. One exception to that is culture, obviously, but we'll leave that to one side. I don't think about the internet as being about documents, but Tim Berners-Lee on the slide there, who kind of is credited with founding the World Wide Web, said in a 2009 TED Talk, this is the way he described the internet. He said he was working at CERN, the big research lab, and he said all these people were coming from all around the world, and they were bringing with them these documents. And he wanted to work with them all because he was excited. He's a very creative person. If you watch the TED Talk, I can recommend it. He said on all these disks there were documents, and if you just imagine them as being part of some big virtual documentation system in the sky, then life would be so much easier. His mentor at the time, I think, described the idea as being vague but interesting, which is an interesting point. We'll go back one. So I mentioned that basically these are some of our favourite PDFs we've produced. Quick show of hands for who came to this talk wanting to defend PDF. No, okay. I thought there might be a couple showing up who really wanted to tell me that I'm just using the wrong PDF format or something like that, but which we may be. So essentially, Hamish and I have had a hand in producing a few different PDFs. I mentioned the work with PCO in the top right-hand corner there on access to legislation as data via an API. In the bottom right, I'll call out this other report that we did on turning judicial decisions into structured data, which is a really interesting sort of public interest research project. In the top left, we have some work that was published in the MIT Computational Law Review, which is very cool, about our work on rules as code and digital legal systems. And then in the middle there, we have a nice photo of Hamish, in case you can't spot him in the audience, with some of his original work around the Better Rules program. And I know there's a few Service Innovation Lab people in the audience today. Because we've been working with these documents, we've found them very frustrating. Not our own documents. Our own documents are great. The government documents. We've found it frustrating over time. So we've had a lot of time to think about how would we do this differently. And before we start, we need to sort of emphasise that we're not reinventing the wheel here. This is one of Hamish's sayings. We're not reinventing the wheel, we're just making it spin. So there's a very cool opportunity to kind of build on some of the early web stuff that Andy called out in his presentation and kind of do it better this time in terms of how we put documents online. Unfortunately, a lot of the way that we've done that has primarily just been through kind of HTML that we don't maintain over time, or PDFs, which are basically just photos of a document rather than structured data itself. We're going to talk you through two specific use cases for how we've used this sort of digital regulatory infrastructure. And I'm going to briefly pause to talk about why the API guidelines and the identification standards are a really good use case for this, because they're built around some good constraints. So APIs, as this audience will know, are kind of all about basically transferring information in a structured way. And then identification is something that predates a kind of digital framework. If you think about it, identification is a huge part of how government has worked for a long time, well before we were even talking about computers, let alone the internet. But a common thing that runs through both of them is they're very high risk. Security is a really big concern. They're fundamentally digital in today's day and age in the way that they work. And they're a massive unlocker for a huge amount of sort of cross-government collaboration, interaction, efficiency gains, and other things like that. There's also very good opportunity for collaboration, not just within government, but also with external parties too, with the service providers or the private sector. So because they have to work around these kind of digital interoperable systems, the constraints that these documents impose are necessary, desirable, and fundamental. And importantly as well, we're kind of working with documents that are kind of inextricably digital. They regulate digital systems, and they're meant to be kind of referenced in digital systems as well. But there's also some bad constraints, and we're going to talk you through some of those and how we've resolved them with our DocRef system. Now, please don't try to read that slide. On the left-hand side, we have the API guidelines. And then on the right-hand side, we have the identification management standards. Now, in many ways, think about the world that Tim Berners-Lee encountered. This is light years ahead in terms of the world that he was looking at. We have HTML, it's all interlinked, it's structured, there's different ways of presenting it, and anybody around the world can see it like that, from a phone or from a computer. So in many ways, we're doing really well. And this is not about attacking digital.gov as well. This is a common issue around the world. On the left-hand side, I'm kind of taking you into the actual documents now. And again, please don't read. But the top left, we have an example of some computer code. So that's included in the document. Underneath that, we have a table. So again, a very kind of computational way of presenting data, which is very useful for displaying all kinds of things. And then on the right-hand side, you might be able to see that some of those subheadings have unique identifiers. So they have things like FA 2.02 control. And that's because they're meant to be referenced by both downstream documentation systems and then also computer systems and data structures and code bases and software. But think to yourself, how would you actually use any of this? So we're embarking on a process of going, do these API guidelines work? And how do people relate to the identification standards? Ask yourself, what's the process for that? I'm sure some of you have been on the receiving end of emails that say, hey, we're reviewing these standards, can you tell us what you think? And I know for me, the first step there is sort of, okay, how am I going to even, do I print this and highlight it? Do I start copying and pasting stuff into another document? How am I going to deal with any of this? It's a frustrating process. These are bad constraints. So again, from experience, having worked with both of these documents in previous projects and contracts, how would you take notes? How would you highlight? How would you reuse this information in different formats? How would you export it to your favourite sort of note-taking app? How would you link back to it? How would you reference it in code or in other documents? How would you manage versions and track changes between these things? If you've got systems or documents that are either upstream or downstream, how do you manage dependencies? So let's say the document changes in the middle, how do you know whether anything's been kept up to date? And then, as we're talking through now, imagine that I ask you to kind of engage with these documents from a kind of consultation perspective, as we do with members of the public all the time, and with other agencies within government. How do you even begin to kind of work with that? And then obviously we've been talking about AI quite a bit today as well. And I feel like I wish I had $1 for every time somebody said, it's actually all about the data, because it's true. It's very much all about the data. And actually, people have been saying that since at least 2017, I think. So we need to get onto that. And then think about the publishing process. So I'm sure some of you have had the experience, or maybe you've been the lucky person that sort of receives the document and goes, now I have to put this on the internet. How do I do that? How long does that take? What are your tools for doing that? So the elephant in the room, as Victoria described, bear in mind as I'm ripping through this, because I don't want it to be too much of a tech demo, that if things aren't making sense to you, then that's great. We'd love to hear that. But there's lots of different pieces of this elephant. And one of the things we're struggling with is basically how to weave it through all the different systems. And actually this is a per agency issue too. So I've actually been in multiple demonstrations. We go, this is great, this is exactly what we need, but why would we go first? This feels like an all-of-government thing, which is kind of incredible to hear. We're very excited to hear those kinds of things and also intimidated by what that means. So this is the DocRef alpha. So it's just an alpha. Please don't put us on the front page of the Dominion Post if something doesn't work. It's a demonstration. It's a website. Don't get caught up with how the website looks. Because this is data, we can present it however you want, and that's part of what we're thinking through with you. As you can see, we've got two collections on the left-hand side there, the API guidelines and the identification standards. So remember these two delightful screenshots of a web page? This is how they look in DocRef. So not that different. And that's kind of the point. We want to represent the same content in a reliable way so you can have confidence that we've done that and we haven't dropped any commas or full stops or line breaks or anything like that, which, as we know, can make a critical difference when you're dealing with law and regulation or government documents. So on the left-hand side, if I step you through again, at point 1, we've got our code example. So that code example, not only can I link you specifically to the example box, but I can also link you to any line within that box. So a pinpoint link. At point 2, we've got the same table, but rather than it being a kind of static asset where I basically have to say to you, hey, go to the table, it's at 1.6.1, and then see how it's got the column. The column says post, and go down 4, go down 4, and see it says should use if blah. I've been in court where judges and lawyers are doing this with each other. The communication bandwidth issue is terrible there in terms of describing how to get to a bit in a document. And then at point 3, we've got that same numbered list of controls, and we have other links out. But the difference is that you can generate a pinpoint link to that heading, to the paragraph underneath it, or to any of those bullet points as well. So you can send a link directly to a bullet point. What I'm going to do now is kind of step you through that big list I had of complaints about how to use information. First thing I'm going to show you, just to anchor you in where we are, is this notes, highlights and tagging thing the referencing and how it works, and then how that's useful in consultation and review processes. So on the screen, what we have is Rule 9 in the Digital Identity Services Trust Framework Rules. This is a document that's anticipated to be updated every 6 months, and it regulates digital identity systems, and it requires the use of controls and objectives and other kinds of downstream policy documentation. At point 1, you can see there's a little box around Roman numeral 2 there. And what that means at point 2 is there's a pinpoint link in that URL bar up the top. At point 3 on the slide, I'm going to step you through what that means. And that sounds like the most boring thing that you're going to hear all day. But it's important because this creates the infrastructure layer that everything else is going to be built off. And it's also, Andy was talking about, how do we create a kind of long-term 50-year stable system of unique identifiers for things like legislation. This is our answer to that question. So the first line, we have the basic domain, right? This is a subdomain. It's just hanging off the digital.gov site. You can make that anything you want. So we could have individual agencies with their own .ref site. We could have a core repository where everybody goes. The options are endless there. The next line down, we have NZ. So we have a jurisdiction tag. And that's because we're thinking internationally. And we've done some work with EU regulation in particular. And if you think about digital regulation as well, it's kind of fundamentally cross-border. So increasingly we need to think about regulation as this kind of international stack. The middle line there, DIA distiff rules, is just a little slug. So it's just a document identifier. You can make that anything you want. But the benefit of it is it means that when you're looking at the URL, you know what document it relates to. Under that, we have a 2. And that 2 is a version number. What that means is that every pinpoint link you're generating goes to a specific version. So if you then publish a different version, you can see which version you're pointing to, which is a big issue for information management across government. Under that, we have a little English language tags. You know what language it's in. It's going to be increasingly an issue for New Zealand to deal with, and is a big feature of other jurisdictions. And then the bottom line there is our unique identifier. So that's automatically added to all of these different document elements. So bullet points, table cells, lines and code, images, drop-downs, you name it. It says Part 2, Rule 9, Para 5B, Roman 2. And that's because that's what we're looking at. So if you zip over to the left-hand side again, you can see we're in Rule 9, 5B, 2. And the benefit of that is, again, you know what you're looking at when you've got that URL. This is what it looks like to take notes. So at point 1, what I'm doing is I'm basically adding a note on any one of those document elements directly in the browser. So think of it like sticky notes that you can take directly in the browser. There's no need to kind of export and take stuff with you. You're not going to have to copy and paste between Word or OneNote or whatever else you're using. You can just take notes in that browser. Underneath it are also some tags. So you can basically add tags, and then you can filter by those tags. So what you could be doing is putting a document out for consultation that is kind of pre-tagged with different themes running through it. And rather than asking everybody out there to look at the entire thing or make their way through the kind of subheadings or the table of contents, you could basically just be showing them exactly what they need to see. And they could also be providing feedback to you as a structured data set. So rather than receiving PDFs or Word documents or whatever, and then needing to go and put that all into your Excel spreadsheet, you just receive the thing already as structured data. So that's tranche 1 of Tech Demo. How's everyone feeling about the elephant so far? Because I'm going to need to go very quickly. Okay, what I'm going to do now is show you versioning and track changes and the upstream-downstream dependencies piece of this. And this is where the knowledge management people and the implementation people tend to get very excited. So, at point 1, you can see a little indicator. And that's this emerging thing we're developing, which is a governance indicator. And that's meant to tell you at a glance, is this the latest version? Are there other versions? Is this official? Or has somebody else produced it? It lets you know immediately whether the information you're looking at can be relied upon and to what extent. If I zip you over to point 2, You can see I've got version 1 and version 2 side by side on the screen, and that's an automated markup of the changes between version 1 and 2. We didn't do that manually. That was done automatically, thankfully. And importantly as well, I'm going to foreshadow later, that is the result of a programmatic changelog. If you don't understand what that means, I barely hold on to what it means either, but the key thing to understand is it's way more powerful than a track changes. It's essentially a data set of what's changed in the document, and that opens the door to automated updates of downstream systems. At point 3, we've also got a history tab, so I'm going to click point 3 and jump to the Privacy Act. So what we have here, you might not be able to see that, but it says we've got 25 available versions of the Privacy Act. So Hamish has built software that reuses PCO's data from legislation.gov and pulls all of the versions of the Act in that structured format. So at point 1, you can see the version numbers. Again, please don't try and read this slide. We've got the version numbers, we've got the date of the version, then all of the pinpoint URLs to that document. And you'll be able to see if you cast your eye down the kind of right-hand side of that middle list, all of the version numbers incorporated in there. At point 2, you've got those little governance indicators that tell you whether this thing is likely to change. Is it an official thing? Is it unofficial? And then at point 3, you've got the indication of the number of changes in that document. So that's the programmatic changelog. And what that means is we can compare those different documents and see what's changed. The reason that's important is because you can use those sort of upstream and downstream things, whether it's documents or code. And then also the cool thing, which I need to show you here, is that if I use a pinpoint link from this compared view, it will take you or a colleague or somebody else to that compared view. So rather than needing to copy and paste and try and articulate what's changed, you can just jump straight into the document and annotate and tag it as well. Here we are shifting to dark mode, and that's because .ref has dark mode. No recognition. Some people love that and some people don't, but Hamish actually has a design degree, so we have dark mode. And this is a document about API development. So this is a policy document in the API guidelines that is written for technical people. So we're in dark mode. At point 2, we have a Tools tab up the top. So if we click that, you'll get a drop-down menu. And the drop-down menu includes the ability to export documents for reuse as structured data. At point 1, you can see the different formats we have. So one of the things you can't see on the screen as well is that any of these documents is also available via API. So each of the pinpoint links that I've provided can provide you with a specific part of the document. So you can pull all of part 1, all of part 2, you can pull an individual bullet point, you can pull a paragraph. The possibilities are pretty wide open there. At point 1, you'll see one kind of download we can do is just a basic spreadsheet or a JSON dataset for people who are more technical. And what that does is it gives you 3 fields, the ID, the content, and the pinpoint links. At point 2, what we've done is we've pre-chunked those same files. The reason that's important is because when you're providing data sets to an AI, you need to group the content to provide adequate context. So if you provide just an individual table cell without that wider table, then you're in trouble because it doesn't make any sense to the AI. So that pre-chunking is a big deal. And then at point 3, you'll see some other formats we have in the pipeline. One is obviously a PDF, because we need PDF. The middle one is a doc, so that could be Markdown, or it could be a Word document. And then on the right-hand side, we also have the capability to go from our format to a standardized legal XML format called Legal DocML or a Coma and Toso. So that's in the pipeline too. I mentioned we have these chunked data sets. And just in terms of creativity and thinking about the future in terms of AI, this is a internal only, it's not public, chatbot demo that uses .ref data sets. I developed it and I don't know how to write code. So the future that we need to be thinking about is digital beyond our wildest dreams in terms of what people are going to be doing with this information. At point 1, you can see, because it's a chatbot, I can ask questions in natural language that makes sense to me. At point 2, you can see the search layer that's going and retrieving all of the information, because this is retrieval augmented generation. And then at point 3, you can see the answer coming back from the model, and it's giving you pinpoint references for its answers. So some of those links will be to things like table cells or bullet points or whole parts or subparts or whatever. And then at point 4, for kind of accountability and assurance and quality purposes, we have an export function too. So you can basically download the chat and put it on the front page of the Dominion Post, or take it to your lawyer, or complain, or whatever else you might do with it. Just briefly underneath this, you can see the list of sources that has been pulled for that answer. You can see the docref URL at point 2, and then also the content of that particular block. And then at point 3 on the right-hand side, you can see a similarity score. So we can build in kind of transparency mechanisms in the way that we design and deploy these things. Finally, what I'm going to do is just jump into the publishing process. So this all sounds really good, but it all sounds really space age, far away. It's not. We're trying to make it very easy. And we're also trying to make it so that we're not going to force you to work in a certain way. So we feel really strongly that people need to be able to work the way that they already work in lots of ways. As I mentioned, a lot of digital regulation in particular is kind of a stack. It's a regulatory stack, as I think about it. So within the identification standards work, we have 2 acts and we have some regulations, which are published by PCO, thank you, Andy, in really great structured data format that we can do cool things with. Then we have the DISTIF rules, which I showed you. At the moment, that's published as a PDF. And the comparison is done in ways that would benefit from docref. But it means that we can work from PDF. Then underneath that, we have all of the material on the digital.gov site, as it is now. And that includes just HTML pages. Some of that is standard, some of that's guidance, right? Because you've got these diverse publishers, you need a diverse approach to publishing. You've got diverse authors. This isn't a matter of PCO is going to tackle this all, because PCO doesn't publish everything. So the other thing to think about, as we heard, is judicial decisions, cabinet papers, all these other materials that might be out there. So some of the things that we're working towards are a Word plugin. So basically you just write in Word and you get this format out. We already have a conversion process for PDF and Word. We already pull things in XML from the PCO website. And then we'll also have an editor, which is meant to be easy, but for those of you that like Markdown, you could write in Markdown and go straight to docref format. The key thing as well is that once you do this kind of writing process, what you get out of it is multiple different formats. So you can get your PDF in the top left, you can get your Markdown top middle, you can get your chunked JSON top right, you can get your HTML directly out from the system, bottom left. You can get your spreadsheet to work with, so you might be technical but not that technical, but you might want to filter a document by presence of a keyword, or you might even do some kind of statistical analysis on it or something like that, and you can use Excel to do that. And then on the right-hand side at the bottom, you have the docref output too. So there's our digital elephant. You can see how it's interesting to try and work out how these pieces fit together. And because of the way that this approach to digital regulatory infrastructure that Jim is going to touch on sits across different sort of parts of government and also different teams within government, it's this really interesting exercise in trying to think about how the elephant fits together. From a creativity perspective, Tim Berners-Lee made the point that, he kind of said, could you put your documents on this web thing? It's this great cloud in the sky. It's going to be great. And everyone, thought that's vague but interesting. But we did. And think about how the world's changed, for good or for worse. The next phase of this, as I mentioned, is vibe coding. People who don't know how to write software, being able to create personalised programs that do stuff with government information. At point 1, we have an excerpt from the Claude Anthropic page, and basically you can download it in multiple formats. And this is kind of standard for technical documentation. And then at point 2, you have a new tool that basically takes any GitHub repo, turns it into Markdown, and lets you feed that into an AI. So, big creative potential. Jim, I'll hand over to you.
Well, I'm between you and lunch, so I'll keep it fairly short. We did our work on the API guidelines, and I've worked on 3 versions of the API guidelines. And the first was in 2016, and we used some work that MPI had done originally. We then reviewed them in 2021, published them in 2022. That was quite a hard exercise. And then, as part of our service modernisation initiatives, we reviewed them earlier this year. This time, we got a bit creative. Victoria got brave and courageous, and we used Syncopate Lab and the DocRef tool to take what is actually 300 pages if you print them out. And there's some conclusions we've got from doing that exercise. A, it was way easier to read and review, so that was wonderful. But also we found that if you've been told by your manager, I want an API for this service, I want it good, I want it reliable, I want it trustworthy, you don't probably want to read a 300-page primer on APIs. So that's where we're now looking at some really good APIs that agencies already have, and we're going to work backwards. We're going to have code examples, we're going to have things, and then they can, using the links that we already have, can link to the relevant portions of the API guidelines, but ultimately getting more pragmatic, more practical. So that's the API guidelines. But as we were doing that, we thought, this looks amazing for identification and the identification standards. So then Victoria again set up, and we extended this to look at the identification guidelines. So that's what we're doing now. But the thing that I think we're finding with this is there's people talking about digital public infrastructure, DPI. What is digital public infrastructure? Well, if we look at the authoritative data sets that agencies and the government holds, it's making those open, it's making those visible, it's making those so that people can use it and spark creativity. And that's where I want to introduce my shirt. So this shirt references, you have Van Gogh's Cloud Starry Night, and you have a police phone box, a blue one. That's the TARDIS. Now, I'm supposed to be clicking this clicker. There we go. Now, a couple of things that I want to draw on this. The first is with Starry Nights. Van Gogh's work was not recognised when he was alive. And that's the great thing with this episode that I love from Doctor Who, is uses the TARDIS, takes Van Gogh to the future, to now, and they visit an art gallery where the guy's just absolutely enthusiastic about his art. And this is a guy that was never appreciated in his time. And I recently went to one of the shows, a multimedia show, where they're using digital. So there's this across the world now. Billions of people can appreciate Van Gogh's creativity. But also, it sparks creativity. You look at what he's done, and you become inspired. Okay, so that's the Van Gogh bit. Now, what do people say about that police box, the TARDIS? It's bigger on the inside. And that's like a lot of our documents, whether they be HTML, if we just say, oh, it's the Privacy Act. There's a vast amount of work went into getting that act. There's a vast amount of creativity went in that. And it provides good constraints. So if we can actually expose and see what those good constraints are, if we can make it digital public infrastructure, it's going to lead to AI that we can trust. AI that actually gives people the right answers and isn't creative and hallucinate. We want creativity, we don't want hallucination. So, in conclusion, if people want to know and want to see how they can turn their authoritative data sets into authoritative digital public infrastructure, you're welcome to ask questions and get in touch.
Excellent. Well, we've got one question, and I've got a couple of statements, which are feature requests, which I'll share with you. So the question is, do you have examples of overseas where cross-government API guidelines and standards are working well? So does one of you want to field that question?
What was that last? Examples overseas of... no. We'd love to hear about some, though, as part of the next phase of the work, I think.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that it's actually is quite tough. So this is, as Tom says, I would love to, if you've got some examples of where it's really working well, because we do get a lot of feedback, like often it's for technical experts, but you still need a way in. And also, I think with the DocRef tools and the kind of the digital stack, it's the ability to conform against something as well. I think that I find really exciting, to make, say, like with the verified credentials, if you've got the digital stack around the distiff and the identification standards, imagine being able to make, conform and accredit that really easily. That would be just amazing. So there's heaps of potential there, but yeah, keen on examples that you've got.
And Victoria, there's one last tricky question. Do you just want to touch on how PCO and DIA may or may not be working together on this? What's the relationship?
I think we're kind of doing quite compatible things. Andy, we've talked recently more around accessibility and the barriers that PDFs do provide for accessible, that meaning kind of being able to use by disabled people. So definitely talking in that regard. And we've talked a few times about the work we've been doing, but I think it's all a part of that same kind of broader ecosystem. I don't know if you want to shout anything from the back. Andy? No. Okay. Still working on it.
Clusters.